I remember when life first threw me a curveball, long before Amanda and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. It was back in my early 20s during the chaos of juggling a full-time job and night classes. I'd always dreamed of becoming an architect, but money was tight. I spent most of my free hours drawing blueprints for friends who couldn't pay me more than a coffee. That grind prepared me for everything, or so I thought. The first real test of character came when my younger brother was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. Our family rallied together, hosting bake sales, applying for grants, and fighting with insurance companies to cover his treatments. Those nights in the hospital, watching his small frame hooked up to IVs, I vowed to make every moment count. Around that time, I met Amanda. She was bright, quick-witted, and magnetic. We bonded over a mutual love of literature and late-night diner conversations. Our first date stretched into the wee hours as we debated the meaning of happiness and whether it could exist in a world riddled with chaos. By our third date, I was sure she was the one. Amanda and I married young against everyone's advice. Wait until you're stable, they said. Stability, however, was a distant goal, one I knew we'd achieve together. We rented a modest apartment, pinched pennies, and saved for a future we painted in vibrant hues. The arrival of our first child was both thrilling and terrifying. We were unprepared, but we tackled parenthood with determination, relying on hand-me-downs and sheer willpower. Our second son followed a couple of years later, and life became a blur of diapers, midnight feedings, and endless laughter. It was around this time I started noticing Amanda's restlessness. While I buried myself in work and side projects to secure a better future, she seemed lost in the monotony of domestic life. I tried to bridge the gap, planning date nights, surprising her with little gifts. But the gulf only widened. Still, I convinced myself that love, like architecture, required a strong foundation and consistent upkeep. The cracks appeared subtly at first. A missed dinner here, an unexplained late night there. I chalked it up to the stress of raising 2 young boys and managing a household. But hindsight is cruel, and now those little moments stand out like bright neon signs warning of the storm ahead. As we stepped away from my youngest son's dormitory, Amanda, my wife, wrestled with her emotions, barely keeping her tears in check. We had just helped him settle in, and Amanda wasn't alone in her melancholy. Katie, our neighbor whose son was sharing the dorm room, sniffled quietly by her side. "It feels like they were just little kids yesterday," Katie murmured, retrieving a tissue from her purse. Amanda nodded, accepting a tissue to dab at her own eyes. "It's surreal," she said. "They're stepping into lives where they'll make choices without us hovering over them." While the 2 women talked, I found myself lost in my own thoughts, haunted by a decision I had been grappling with for years. Doubt surged as we approached the parking lot. Was I truly ready to take this step? Was it even necessary, or was it too late? Amanda reached for my hand, but I pretended not to notice, fumbling in my pocket for my car keys, even though we weren't anywhere near the SUV. Katie gave me a questioning glance, but Amanda spoke up. "It's okay, Mark," she said softly. "I know what you're feeling." "If only you did," I thought, my mind drifting to the moment everything began. It was just after Amanda and I had celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary, which happened to coincide with an election year. Back then, politicians seemed to spend all their time accusing each other of being even bigger crooks and liars. I remember cynically wondering whether when these fraudsters died, they were buried in regular graves or just screwed into the ground like the tools they were. That afternoon after lunch, I picked up the mail and was pleased to find a padded envelope among the usual pile of bills and junk mail. I'd been waiting on a delivery of SD cards I'd bought on eBay. Excited, I tore into the envelope, only to find a smaller, slightly bloated manila envelope inside. "Damn it," I muttered, opening the accompanying letter and bracing myself for bad news. The letter read, "Dear Amanda, I hope this finds you well. I've recently acknowledged my heavy drinking problem and am working through recovery with the help of my higher power and a sponsor. I've been sober for 90 days now. As part of the 12-step program, I'm trying to make amends to those I've hurt. I deeply regret our past actions, but I don't want to disrupt your life or cause you emotional distress. That's why I'm writing this letter. I'm asking for your forgiveness, and if you wish, promising never to contact you again. Being closed is something I've held on to for too long. I don't have the strength to destroy it myself, but I also don't want to keep it. Do with it what you will. With warm regards, Josh. What the hell, Josh? I muttered aloud, turning over the smaller envelope in my hands. It was addressed to Amanda. Josh. The only Josh I could recall was a guy we used to know, a washed-up loser who lived in his parents' basement until he was evicted for failing to pay property taxes. Josh was 10 years older than Amanda and me, and we'd nicknamed him Slinky because of the way he always seemed to bounce back from failure, albeit clumsily. My unease grew as I opened the manila envelope. A stack of glossy 8x10 photographs spilled out. The first few showed Amanda, years younger, striking provocative poses in a snug blouse and shorts I recognized immediately. Turning over the framed family photo on my desk, I confirmed the date, 9 years ago. Flipping through the images, I felt my chest tighten. Amanda's outfits became more revealing until eventually she was without top. The final photos showed her fully without clothes and in intimate situations with Josh. I sank into my chair, my head spinning. How long had this been going on? The photos left no room for doubt. There had been an affair. I looked at the framed pictures of my family, trying to spot any trace of Josh in the history of smiles and milestones. One horrifying thought struck me. What if the boys aren't mine? Grabbing a recent photo of Amanda and our 2 sons, I examined it closely. Both boys favored Amanda's features, but shared my jawline and build. Still, doubt knotted me. Desperate for answers, I rifled through my desk drawer until I found a copy of the medical forms our sons had filled out for baseball. Back in my day, forms for kids' activities were straightforward. Just a name and an emergency contact. Now the paperwork had ballooned into nearly 6 pages, asking for details about food allergies, insurance, medications, liability waivers, and consent. Even the treaty that ended World War II managed to fit on a single sheet of paper. It was hard to believe that a youth baseball league could be more complicated than global peace negotiations. Still, I sifted through the bloated form to find what I needed. The blood types our doctor had recorded. I reached into my wallet and pulled out my Red Cross blood donor card. It confirmed I was blood type O, the same as Amanda. We often joked about being the perfect match. Even in an emergency, we could donate blood to each other. When I saw that my eldest son's form also listed him as type O, a wave of relief swept over me. Then I turned to my younger son's form. His blood type was printed clearly in bold letters. A positive. You don't have to be a doctor or even a high school freshman in biology to know that 2 parents with type O blood can't produce a child with type O blood. My heart sank. I stared at those 2 words. A positive, willing them to transform into something else. They didn't. Wild thoughts flooded my mind. I'll leave Amanda. No, I'll confront her. Maybe I'll take the boys and walk away without a word. Or perhaps My spiraling imagination only left me more confused. The boys were 9 and 11. Would they choose to stay with me if we divorced? Would they even get a choice? For an hour, I played out every possible scenario, each one more exhausting than the last. By the time I finally dragged myself upstairs to bed, I wasn't any closer to a solution, just utterly drained. The next morning, I sat silently at the kitchen table, watching Amanda at the sink. The previous night, I had avoided dinner entirely, claiming I wasn't hungry when she and the boys returned from the movies. Everything in the house looked the same, but my perspective had completely shifted. Amanda, standing there, as she always did, now seemed like a stranger. It felt as if a magician had revealed the secret behind a trick I'd been amazed by for years. Every movement she made seemed calculated, every word suspect. "Amanda," I said finally, breaking the silence. Do you remember Josh? I couldn't see her face, but her body stiffened ever so slightly before she replied. Josh, our old neighbor. Wow, I haven't thought about him in years. Yet, Josh, I said slowly. You know, he was always running around with his camera, snapping pictures of everyone's kids. Kinda creepy, don't you think? Amanda let out a small laugh, her tone tinged with relief. Believe me, Mark, Josh wasn't into kids, she said firmly, meeting my eyes. I frowned, my tone sharpening as I pressed her. Oh, and how do you know that? Amanda turned back to the counter, drying her hands on a dish towel. Without missing a beat, she called out for the boys to come to breakfast. Even as casually as if she were commenting on the weather, she explained, I used to see him in the mornings, hung over and sneaking women out of his basement before his parents woke up. My voice cut through the air, tinged with accusation. You seem to know an awful lot about Josh, don't you? Do you miss him? Not at all, Amanda replied, now facing me. It's just that, when Katie moved in, life improved a lot. You know how close our kids are. When Josh lost the house after his parents died, Katie bought it. She used her late husband's life insurance payout. He was a police officer who died in the line of duty. Since her kids were the same age as ours, they practically grew up together. It was easier for everyone to treat them like part of the family. Amanda often joked with Katie about claiming her kids as dependents on our taxes, and Katie, a single mom, leaned on us a lot for help. Amanda would send me over to fix things around her house. Katie wasn't handy, but she was easygoing, and our arrangement worked. Still, my father had raised me to be a man of integrity, and I never crossed any boundaries. Amanda tapped my shoulder playfully. Mark, don't tell me you're suddenly jealous of Josh after all these years. I leaned back in my chair. Amanda, is there a reason I should be jealous? Amanda hesitated, stirring her coffee without meeting my gaze. Of course not, she said. Josh was just a harmless drunk with a camera. He probably could have been a good photographer if he hadn't been wasted all the time. Her words didn't reassure me. Amanda, I said evenly, you're acting strangely defensive. Is there something you want to tell me? She slammed her coffee cup down and glared at me. Before she could respond, the boys barreled into the kitchen, cutting the conversation short. As I climbed the stairs, I realized that no matter how much time passed, the trust I'd lost in Amanda would never return. The next day, I brought everything to my brother Eric, the letter, the photos, and all the paperwork. Eric was technically my half-brother, though we'd grown up together. His parents had fled Eastern Europe during the Cold War and died in a tragic accident when we were kids. A social worker asked my parents to take him in temporarily, but somehow that temporary arrangement became permanent. Eric examined the materials carefully. Mark, he said finally, are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this? I hesitated but nodded. Looking back, I realize now how much of a financial strain it must have been on our working-class family. When I asked my mom years later how she managed it all, she simply shrugged and said, cut the bread thinner. Add more water to the soup. My father, a deeply religious man, never turned away anyone in need, but his faith wasn't rooted in rituals or affiliations with organized religion. To him, belief was about action, not words. At the end of every dinner prayer, he'd say, next time may there be more at the table, not less. And Lord, please save us from your followers. Dad treated Eric no differently than he treated me or my brothers. It was both a blessing and a curse depending on his mood. Before he passed away, I asked him why he'd taken in another child when we were already struggling. His response was simple, because that's what a man does. Eric's pale complexion reflected his Eastern European roots, while my darker skin came from our Southern Italian heritage. Introducing ourselves as brothers often left people scratching their heads. I remember one father's son event where someone remarked, my mother must have been very fair-skinned. My father deadpanned, oh, absolutely. Her skin's practically see-through. Eric went on to excel in life. He graduated at the top of his law school class and was snapped up by a prestigious law firm. Over time, he climbed the ranks to become a partner, working grueling 80-hour weeks to secure his success. He had it all: a sleek car, a luxury apartment overlooking the city, and a stunning fiancée from a wealthy family who accompanied him to every major event. But his picture-perfect life came crashing down the day he burst into his mentor's office to celebrate landing a major client, only to find his fiancée there in a compromising position. Calmly biding his time, Eric stayed with the firm through the year to collect his bonuses and benefits. Then, with strategic precision, he left, taking top lawyers and key clients with him. The firm struggled on for a few years, but eventually collapsed. Eric started his own small practice, focusing on contracts, wills, and other routine legal work. His real income, however, came from serving as outside counsel on high-stakes cases, essentially a legal hitman. Now married with 2 kids, Eric has a quieter life, but we've stayed close over the years. That day, Eric was reviewing the stack of documents I'd brought him. He leaned back and said, "Mark, you're still in shock. Give yourself some time to think clearly." "Oh, like you did," I shot back sarcastically. "You're my hero for how you handled everything at your first law firm." Eric smirked. "Not everyone gets to be the hero, Mark. Someone has to sit by the roadside and cheer as we pass." Then his tone shifted. "Seriously, though, Amanda is human. Most people only focus on how they're being treated. They rarely stop to think about how their actions affect others." I rolled my eyes. "Great, now you're Yoda. Listen, I just want out. My revenge will be making sure that cheating witch doesn't get a single penny. Everyone will know exactly what she did. She doesn't get to blame it on hormones or whatever and think I'm some kind of idiot." Eric grew serious. "Revenge, Mark, is just another way of handing someone power over you. If they know they've hurt you, they win. The real victory is not letting them affect you at all. Trust me, ignoring the emotional misuser is the best long-term move. It's not satisfying in the moment, but it's the only way to truly move on." He turned to his computer and tapped a few keys. "I don't handle family law, but I know someone who does. An absolute shark. No mercy. If you're ready, call him. Just be sure this is what you really want." A week later, Eric and I found ourselves in a high-end corner office downtown. Across from us, a heavy-set lawyer, known for his aggressive reputation, was finishing his review of the stack of papers I'd brought along. Tax returns, pay stubs, mortgage statements, paternity test results, wills, and more. The list of required documents seemed endless. After setting his reading glasses down, he leaned back and spoke. "Walk away from it," he said flatly. I stared at him, stunned. This was the advice of the so-called legal shark. "Are you saying I should just pretend none of this ever happened?" I asked incredulously. "Smile and carry on." Knowing I'd been betrayed, he tilted his chair back slightly and shrugged. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Unless, of course, you've got video evidence of your wife, Amanda, doing something insane like feeding your kids Red Bull and making them wrestle for prize money." He leaned forward and pointed a finger at me. "Here's the deal. You've got a decent life, a wife, a home, 2 kids. If you push too hard, you could end up in a tiny apartment broke, with your kids working part-time jobs to make ends meet, while Amanda moves on with her life and her new male companions, all funded by you. You're saying alimony and child support will eat up most of my income, even for a child that's not mine?" I asked, my voice rising. "Amanda has a job, for God's sake. Why would I have to pay for someone else's child?" The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Mark, I'll gladly take your money if you want to pursue this, but let's talk facts. Her income from that part-time hair salon gig doesn't come close to matching yours. So yes, alimony is practically guaranteed. The only question is how much and for how long. As for child support, There are only 6 states in the entire country where you could avoid paying for a child that isn't biologically yours, but was born during your marriage. We don't live in one of them. What if I can prove Amanda always knew the child wasn't mine? I pressed. Isn't that fraud? The lawyer leaned on the desk, folding his hands. Let me tell you a dirty little secret about the legal system. Even if you could prove she knew and deliberately misled you, this kind of fraud has no real consequences. No penalties, no repayment. Your wife could announce in a full-page ad in the New York Times that she's always known the truth, and the courts wouldn't require her to return a dime of what you've already paid. I slumped in my chair, shaking my head as he continued. Don't believe me? A guy in Florida paid child support for years to a woman he wasn't even married to. When he finally got a DNA test proving the child wasn't his, the court still ruled he had to keep paying because it was deemed in the best interest of the child. That case is still dragging through appeals, but the kid will be 18 before it's resolved, and the man will never see a penny of his money again. Desperate, I asked, what about going after the boyfriend? Can I make him pay me back? The lawyer's expression darkened. In most states, only the mother can seek financial contributions from the biological father. A handful of states let you sue, but you have to prove both the boyfriend and Amanda knowingly deceived you, and that it caused significant hardship to the family. And guess what? Our state doesn't allow it. I sank deeper into my chair, overwhelmed. He leaned back again and spread his arms wide. You've got to ask yourself, Mark, what's more important? Your pride or your sanity? Is it worth losing half your property, your savings, and your income just to make a point? If your goal is to hurt her, it won't restore your self-respect. You're better off cutting ties and finding someone who will appreciate you. Eric, who had been quietly listening, interjected, what about marriage counseling? Couldn't that help? The lawyer let out a bitter laugh. Counseling? At best, it works in maybe 10% of cases. Most of the time, it just gives spouses time to plan their exit strategies. 2/3 of women who attend counseling sessions are the ones who ultimately file for divorce, and more than half of women who cheat end up leaving their marriages entirely. He fixed me with a serious look. You're 35, right? I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. Well, he said, the odds aren't in your favor. Statistically, wives are most likely to cheat around 45. If Amanda's already had one affair, the chances of her doing it again in a few years are almost certain. People romanticize their past mistakes, forgetting the pain but clinging to the excitement. That thrill becomes something they chase, and most will cheat again to try and relive it. Eric nodded grimly. Once a cheater, always a cheater, he muttered. The lawyer shrugged. Nothing's guaranteed, but infidelity is the second most common reason for divorce, right after money issues. I clenched my fists. I swear this won't happen to me again. The lawyer smiled faintly. Swear all you want, Mark. Swearing's just a compromise between fight and flight. I exhaled heavily. This is such crap. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. You've got kids, Mark. Divorce changes everything for them. Statistically, children of divorce are more likely to misuse substances, act out sexually, and struggle with anger or depression. No one wins in a divorce. Not really. But the biggest losers are always the kids. Suddenly, I recalled the day I told my father I was going to be a dad. His words had stayed with me ever since. Mark, he said, a lot of men become fathers, but few fathers truly become men. To be both a man and a father, your only priority must be your children. If there's not enough food, you go hungry. If there's no shelter, you brave the cold. If money's tight, you go without. Strength is key. Not the kind of fake bravado that crumbles when tested, but real strength, the kind that lets you admit when you need help. You'll find out how strong you are when it's all you've got. You'll make mistakes, but don't let doubt paralyze you. A true man's efforts are rarely appreciated or acknowledged. Often they're mocked. But he doesn't do it for recognition. He does it for his family, for his children, because that's what a real man does." Those words echoed in my mind as I stood abruptly, pushing my chair back, as though jolted awake. I extended my hand to the lawyer. "Thank you for your time," I said. "I've learned a hell of a lot today, but I don't think I'll need your services." "What do I owe you for your effort?" The lawyer grinned and shook my hand. "No charge, Mark. This was just a conversation between old colleagues. Besides," he added, glancing at Eric, "I owe your brother for bailing me out of a sticky situation back in the day. My door is always open to you, anytime." Later, as Eric drove us home, I turned to him. "Eric, after you caught your fiancée with your mentor, why didn't you leave the firm immediately? Why stick around for nearly a year?" Eric's jaw tightened before he answered. "Believe me, my first thought was to quit right then and there," he said with a wry smile. "Actually, my first thought was to head bum that old fool. And I did." He fiddled with the radio, switching stations. After leaving him sprawled out on the carpet, I went to my office and typed up my resignation letter. "So, why didn't you hand it in?" I was furious. "Mark." Then I started feeling sorry for myself. But I could practically hear Dad's voice reminding me that self-pity is useless. Why should I let those two clowns rob me of everything I'd worked for? The next day, the senior partner came to me acting all concerned about the misunderstanding. Eric smirked. What he really cared about was keeping me and the clients I brought in. He offered me the moon to stay, and I made him put it in writing. From that moment on, no one controlled my happiness but me. I even kept the fiancée around for a little while just because. When I found someone better, she was history. Same with the firm. Once my contract was up, I was gone. Eric's words stuck with me. From that moment forward, I decided to focus on what made me happy while staying true to my father's belief that children come first. As for Amanda, she became a background character in my life. Things shifted a week after my meeting with the lawyer. Over dinner, Amanda announced, "Mark, I've got great news. The salon is promoting me to full-time manager. I'll need to work evenings and weekends, but I'm sure you and the boys can manage meals without me." It was perfect. By the time Amanda woke up in the morning, I was already gone for work. When I got home in the evening, she was at the salon. By the time she returned, I was fast asleep. On her days off, I told her I had a darts leak. In reality, I started seeing a psychoanalyst. Through those sessions, I realized two things. I wasn't any more flawed than the next guy, and I was entitled to my own happiness. As actions, past, present, or future, were beyond my control. Life is full of temptations, and it's our own weakness that leads us to give in. The moment I stopped trusting Amanda, my feelings for her changed. Over time, the anger dulled, but the distance remained. Everything I did for my kids, period. Amanda became like a neighbor with benefits, someone who happened to live under the same roof. She was so consumed with work that I don't think she even noticed. Meanwhile, the boys and I thrived. I took out a home equity loan and transformed our house, a pool in the backyard, a new deck, and a fully loaded man cave in the basement. I ditched my boring sedan for a massive SUV. With all that space, I carted the boys and Katie's kids around in comfort, buying season tickets to sporting events and treating the whole group to pizza or ice cream after games. Katie often joined us on these outings. People sometimes assumed we were one big family. I'd half joke, I wouldn't mind that, learning a puzzled look from her. Amanda, meanwhile, was rarely around. She always had an excuse: her work schedule, exhaustion, or needing to relax. Eventually, the boys stopped inviting her altogether. A few years ago, my oldest son and Katie's eldest were both accepted into the same college. My son received a partial scholarship, but I quietly covered the rest of his expenses, as well as Katie's child's tuition without her ever knowing. 3 years later, the same situation played out with our younger children. That brings us to today as I grapple with the decision. Should I stay and keep things as they are? Or is it time to move on? Amanda was lounging on the back deck, savoring the last warm days of summer, a glass of wine in hand. She gazed out at the pool as I returned from cleaning out the remnants of our road trip from the SUV. Settling into the chair across from her, I watched as she closed her eyes and sighed. "Mark, now that the boys are gone, the house feels so empty," she said, taking another sip of her wine. "I think I'm ready for a change." I had already made up my mind, though I kept my thoughts to myself. "Oh, Amanda," I thought, "you'll get the change you're ready for." I tossed a stack of papers onto the glass top table between us. "Amanda, I think it's time we ended this," I said. "I want a divorce." Her eyes snapped open. "What the hell is this, Mark?" "It's a copy of the divorce petition," I replied evenly. "Once you've got a lawyer, I'll have mine send over the official documents. As you'll see, I've been fair. The savings. Are you insane?" Amanda interrupted, her voice rising. "After 20 years, you're doing this now? After everything we've been through together?" She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief. "No alimony. What about the savings? The household debt? What's your game here?" I kept my tone calm. "We both make about the same amount of money and have comparable retirement accounts," I explained. That wasn't entirely untrue. I'd made a point of keeping my salary raises modest and minimized contributions to my 401 after using most of it to fund our son's college education. Amanda stared at me, stunned. "We only make the same because I work twice as many hours as you do. I'm not selling this house. I've put too much into it." "Amanda," I said firmly, "the house is underwater. And where do you think the money came from for this deck? For the remodeled kitchen?" She threw the papers back onto the table, her face flushed with anger. "We're not getting divorced," she snapped. "This conversation is over." Then her eyes narrowed, and a new expression crossed her face. "You fool, you found someone else, haven't you? I gave you the best years of my life, and now you're leaving me for some younger woman." Her voice rose, her face turning crimson. "How long has this been going on, Mark? How long have you been cheating on me?" I let out a tired sigh. "Amanda, let's not make this about that. It doesn't matter why. We're in a no-fault state. Everything, assets and debts, will be divided evenly." But Amanda wasn't letting it go. "No, it does matter. I deserve to know the truth. Who is she?" I shook my head. "Amanda, there were mistakes, yes, but we don't need to rehash them now. Let's just move forward." Her response was swift. She hurled her wine into my face, the glass shattering on the deck behind me as I stood and walked toward the kitchen. She followed, shouting insults as I rinsed my face in the sink. "You piece of trash," she screamed. "You think you can throw me out so you can chase some young thing? No wonder our bed life has been awful for years. You've been sneaking around while I stayed loyal." I turned, wiping my face, and calmly placed a stack of photographs on the kitchen table. Amanda froze mid-rant as her eyes fell on the images of her and Josh, each one more damning than the last. Her face turned ghostly pale. "Looks like you've had your own loyalty issues," I said, sitting down. Amanda stumbled to the sink, splashing water on her face before returning to the table. She pushed the photos away with one trembling finger as if they were venomous. "Mark, please, get rid of them," she whispered. I slid the photos back into their envelope and tucked it into a drawer. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said. "I really don't care." "Amanda," she pleaded, clutching my hand. "It was just one time, I swear, please believe me." I pulled my hand away. "Amanda, I don't believe you. Why would I?" Tears filled her eyes as she continued. "It was so long ago. I didn't know how hard being a mother would be. I was sleep-deprived, overwhelmed, and you were always so busy with work and school. I felt like I was losing myself, like I wasn't Amanda anymore, just someone's wife or mom." I leaned back, unimpressed. "Amanda, I was working 2 jobs and going to college for our family. I don't need to hear about how hard it was for you." She ignored my words and pressed on. "Josh was just fun. His mom would come over to help with the baby sometimes, and I felt like I could breathe for a little while. Josh always had a drink in his hand, and I started joining him. Then he'd pull out his camera and take pictures, telling me how amazing I looked. It started as a game, pretending I was modeling for him. I'd lift my blouse a little or pull it off one shoulder. It wasn't a big deal. People see more on the beach." Her voice trailed off. But I had heard enough. Amanda's eyes glistened with tears as she began to speak. "One day, I mentioned wanting a nice photo of you for Christmas. Josh offered to take it for free. The shoot went great, and the picture turned out beautiful. Afterward, our son fell asleep on the couch in Josh's studio." "You mean his parents' basement, Amanda?" I interjected, my tone sharp. She wiped a tear away, her voice trembling. "Yes, his basement. Our son was sound asleep, and I didn't want to disturb him. Josh and I had a drink to wind down. One drink turned into an entire bottle, and, well, with your hectic schedule, you and I hadn't been intimate in a long time. I was feeling excited. When Josh started taking pictures of me again, I guess my bad side came out. He made me feel hot, alive, in a way I hadn't felt in so long. It was like we were doing a real photo shoot, and I let myself get carried away. I felt as though the air had been knocked out of me. I had thought the photographs were the worst of it, but this confession was something else entirely. Are you telling me," I stammered, "that you slept with that drunk while my son was just a few feet away?" Amanda's face crumpled as she buried her head in her hands and sobbed. "Oh God, Mark, I'm so ashamed. I don't know what came over me. Amanda," I interrupted, my voice firm but steady. "We can't change the past. What we can do is own up to our actions. Please, just sign the papers. We'll tell everyone we've grown apart. That's it. Nobody outside this family needs to know anything more." She raised her tear-streaked face, desperation in her eyes. "It doesn't have to be like this, Mark. It was so long ago, a momentary lapse, a stupid mistake with no lasting impact." I pulled another set of documents from my folder and placed them in front of her. "Amanda," I said quietly, "every action has consequences, some more serious than others." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning charts and figures. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It's the results of our family's DNA tests," I said evenly. "As you can see, something doesn't add up." Amanda clutched her chest, her breath hitching. She began to choke, and I quickly grabbed a paper bag from the kitchen. "Breathe into this," I instructed, handing it to her. "Slow, steady breaths through your nose." After a moment, her breathing stabilized, and she placed the bag on the table, her face pale but composed. "You knew," I said, my tone accusatory yet calm. "It wasn't a question." She shook her head vehemently, twisting the paper bag in her hands. "I suspected, but I didn't know. I hoped. I prayed." She trailed off, unable to finish. "Come on, Amanda," I pressed. "You graduated with honors in biology. You must have thought I was an idiot for believing your story about a premature birth." She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I continued, "You cheated on me, Amanda. And worse, you made me raise a child that wasn't mine, all while feeding me lies." Tears streamed down her face as she protested. "I wasn't like that, Mark." After what happened with Josh, I was consumed by guilt. I couldn't bear to let anyone touch me, not even you. I promised myself I'd be the best mother and wife to make up for it. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I had nightmares about you leaving me, taking our son, or forcing me to get an abortion. "Amanda," I said, exasperated, "have I ever threatened you? Have I ever forced you to do anything? You know how much I value family. If you've been honest, we could have figured things out together. Instead, you chose to lie." "It was just one lie," she pleaded. "No, Amanda," I said firmly. It was a lie every single day from then until now. You chose to live in deceit. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice, she whispered. You just didn't trust me enough to make the right one. Now it's my turn to make a choice. She broke down again. Please, Mark, she begged. I shook my head. The lies end here. The boys deserve the truth. Secrets destroy trust. Amanda, either you tell them, or I will. Her voice cracked. What do you expect me to say? Hey boys, your mom is a lying, unfaithful mess who betrayed your father. I managed a small, weary smile. You can leave out the colorful adjectives. Just tell them you made a mistake, that we both love them, and that nothing changes that. When the time came, the boys handled it better than I expected. In today's world, where blended families and step-parents are common, the situation didn't seem to faze them much. Amanda, however, grew increasingly bitter. She insisted we could work things out, lamenting the wasted effort we'd put into the house. But I was done. I wanted to move on. Oddly enough, the house ended up being more of a headache than the divorce itself. Our megabank gave us the runaround at every turn when we tried to hand it back to them. Every short sale we attempted was blocked, and we could never speak to the same person twice. Each bank representative gave us conflicting answers to the same questions, and the paperwork they demanded was beyond ridiculous. It felt like we had personally deforested Washington state with the endless written requests we submitted. Thankfully, my brother Eric reached out to one of his friends, a real estate attorney with a reputation for tackling big banks. Over the next several months, he uncovered numerous violations by Megabank, not just breaches of their own policies, but also violations of state and federal homeowner protection laws. Ironically, the tables turned when Megabank didn't even bother showing up to the court hearing. Despite being served with 4 certified notices, we received a default judgment that granted us ownership of the house free and clear, plus reimbursement for court and attorney fees. What followed was a circus. Our lawyer arrived at the local Megabank branch, flanked by 2 armed sheriffs, a court order, and a moving company. They were there to seize assets, furniture, computer equipment, and more. When the bank ignored repeated notices about the unpaid attorney fees, the local media got wind of the story. Crowds gathered to watch as bystanders gleefully helped dismantle the bank's signage and lights. The branch manager, visibly shaken, tried calling his superiors, but since his office phone was among the confiscated items, he had to use his personal cell. The story of David versus Goliath spread nationwide, turning our lawyer and Brief Limey into minor celebrities. As for the house, it played a role in finalizing our divorce settlement. Amanda refused to sell it immediately, so we reached a compromise. She would pay me half the rental value each month while covering utilities like gas, electricity, and water. We split taxes and insurance evenly, and we agreed to divide any future sale proceeds equally. For divorce, I did what most newly single middle-aged men do: rented a mediocre apartment while figuring out my next steps. Naturally, I joined a gym in an effort to get back in shape. Though I've always hated working out, one evening while waiting for a free personal training session at the gym, I heard a familiar voice. "Mark, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you." I turned around to see Katie, our old neighbor. She looked fantastic in a snug leotard bearing the gym's logo. She hugged me tightly, and I couldn't help but notice how firm she felt. "Katie, wow, you look amazing," I said when she let go. "What brings you here?" "I work here part-time," she said, glancing at the clipboard in her hands. "And guess what? Looks like I'm your trainer tonight. So which machine are we starting with?" How about a trade?" I joked. "I'll buy you the chocolate bar of your choice." Katie laughed and dragged me toward a lineup of contraptions that looked like they belonged in a medieval torture chamber. One of them resembled the gym equipment I remembered from high school. Determined not to look weak, I pushed myself through a grueling 90-minute session, during which I threw up twice. I lied, blaming it on too much coffee at work. Katie took pity on me and agreed to meet at a nearby cafe afterward. while she looked fresh and glowing. I felt like a zombie as she held my arm and led me to the counter. "Katie, when did ordering coffee become so complicated?" I asked as she rattled off what sounded like a chemistry formula to the barista. "Aren't there just 3 sizes, small, medium, and large?" She laughed, her voice light and cheerful. "Mark, just tell the barista what you like. They can make it for you." "Fine," I said, shaking my head. "Just give me something manly enough to drink at a football game without getting mocked." Katie chuckled and patted my shoulder as we found a table. "Mark, I've missed you." "Ha, I did just miss having someone fix things at your house for free," I teased. She grinned mischievously. "Maybe a little, but seriously, I'm sorry about you and Amanda. It's hard to believe she cheated on you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? Who told you that?" Katie set her cup down and studied me for a moment. "No one. I'd just known you both for a long time. I can't prove anything. It's just a gut feeling, I guess." She always had this look, like she was constantly hoping not to get caught. I considered her words. "So Amanda never actually said anything to you?" Katie shook her head. "No, Mark, but let me ask you this. If she came clean, would it change anything? Would you take her back?" I shook my head firmly. It's not just about the cheating. It's the lies, the betrayal, the lack of trust. Once that's gone, what's left? Trying to rebuild trust with Amanda feels as impossible as a blind man using a microscope. Without trust, there's no point. The marriage is over. Katie nodded in understanding. "Well," she said, "here's to moving forward." I tried to ease the tension by cracking a few jokes about my clash with Amanda and the unusual terms of our divorce settlement. Katie laughed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely relaxed. The conversation flowed naturally, and before I knew it, the time had slipped away. Katie suddenly checked her watch and let out a small gasp. "Oh no, Mark, I've got to run. The last bus is about to leave." I waved her off. "Forget the bus. I'll give you a ride home." Her relief was instant, but she hesitated. "Thanks, Mark. My car's been out of commission. Starter issues. I think it's finally given up the ghost. But things have been tight since my hours got cut at work. I was planning to scrape together enough to get it fixed after my next paycheck." I frowned, glancing at my own watch. "Katie, why didn't you say something sooner? Let's head to the auto parts store now and pick up a new starter. I'll take care of it tonight." She hesitated again, her cheeks coloring slightly. "That's really generous, but I don't have the money right now. I couldn't ask you to." "You didn't ask," I interrupted with a grin. "Call it a loan. Pay me back when things settle down. Besides, all my tools are still in Amanda's garage. I've been too lazy to move them. Let's put them to good use." I stood and extended my hand to her. "Come on, your chariot awaits." She raised an eyebrow. "Chariot? Please tell me it's not that oversized gas guzzler you used to drive." I laughed. "Not anymore. I traded it in for a Prius, trying to save the planet 1 gallon at a time." Katie gave me an exaggerated look of disbelief. "You? Driving a Prius? I can't even picture it." "Trust me, neither can I admitted. "Every time I climb into that tiny thing, I feel like I'm losing a bit of my masculinity. But hey, size matters, right?" She laughed as I let her out to the car. We lucked out at the auto parts store. They had the right starter in stock, and it was on sale. Amanda wasn't home, so I still had access to the garage. With the tools I had on hand, I had Katie's car running again in just over an hour. Katie's face lit up when the engine purred to life. Without warning, she threw her arms around me and kissed me on the lips. I didn't respond, holding a wrench in one hand and wiping sweat from my brow with the other. Later, as I washed up in her kitchen, I noticed the faucet was barely working and the drain was clogged. I turned to Katie. "Why didn't you mention this earlier? I could have fixed it ages ago." "You're dealing with enough going on," I replied. And well, I've been trying to handle things on my own. She paused, her voice trembling. I don't want to feel like a charity case. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Katie, this isn't charity. It's what neighbors do for each other. Besides, I've got more free time than I know what to do with. And you've got plenty to keep me busy. Let's make a list of everything that needs fixing and knock it out one by one. Katie managed a weak smile, brushing away a tear. Okay, but don't blame me if I take advantage of your kindness. Over the next 2 weeks, I spent most of my evenings at Katie's house, tackling small projects, fixing squeaky doors, patching up paint, and replacing worn-out fixtures. Nothing major, but it gave me something to focus on. One night, as we sat together with a bottle of wine, Katie opened up about her late husband. He was one of the good ones, she began softly, always helping people even when it wasn't his job. He died because of a drunk driver, hit him when he stopped to help a woman with a flat tire. The guy didn't even slow down. She paused, her voice catching. My husband held on for 4 days in the hospital. The last thing he said wasn't about himself. He told me, take care of the boys, take care of them, and yourself. Tears streamed down her face as she finished speaking. I walked over and wrapped her in a hug, holding her as she cried. When he passed, everything changed, she continued, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Because he wasn't on duty, we didn't qualify for survivor benefits. His life insurance helped me buy this house, but it wasn't enough. This squad was incredible. They stepped up in ways I'll never forget. But it was too hard staying close to them. Everywhere I had looked, I was reminded of him. I had to leave, even though I wasn't ready for how hard starting over would be. I stayed silent, letting her process her emotions. Sometimes words weren't needed. The next morning, I was lying under Katie's bathroom sink, wrestling with a clogged drain when I felt someone tap my leg. Mark, where'd you go last night? Katie's voice came from somewhere above me. Back to my depressing little apartment, I replied, unscrewing the drain trap. You were wiped out, so I put you to bed before heading out. I slid my hand out from under the sink to show her the drain trap, now filled with tangled hair. Katie, seriously, do you wash a mongoose in this sink? Before she could respond, the front door slammed and hurried footsteps approached, followed by a voice I knew all too well. Where is he? What are you doing with my husband? I groaned, hitting my head on the sink as I pulled myself out from underneath it. Amanda was standing in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. Leave him alone, Amanda shouted at Katie, her voice shrill. I got to my feet, now awkwardly positioned between Katie, who looked bewildered, and Amanda, who was fuming. Amanda, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. What are you doing here? She turned to me, her face set in an expression of self-righteous fury. Don't play dumb, Mark. I know what's going on. Every night, you leave this woman's house looking like you've just plowed a field. I know exactly what you're doing. She paused, taking a deep breath as though trying to compose herself. I get it. You're trying to get back at me, but enough is enough. You've had your fun with her. It's time to come back home where you belong. I blinked, too stunned to respond. Amanda, we're not getting back together. That ship sailed long ago. And for the record, Katie and I. Before I could finish, Katie stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, cutting me off. That's right, Amanda, there's nothing between us. She paused dramatically. But that's about to change. Starting now, I'm taking your ex-husband upstairs. Amanda and I both stood frozen, mouths agape, as Katie calmly took Amanda by the hand and led her to the front door. Please, Katie said, her voice steady. Even though we've known each other for years, call first next time. We'll be busy. With that, she closed the door in Amanda's stunned face. Katie returned to find me still standing in the bathroom, utterly speechless. Katie, I managed. Thanks for the support, but you really didn't need to. Before I could finish, she pulled off her blouse, revealing that she wasn't wearing a bra. Her confidence, combined with her figure, left me momentarily speechless. "Katie, are you sure about this?" I finally asked, forcing myself to look into her eyes rather than anywhere else. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Mark, I've known you longer than I knew my husband. I loved him deeply, and I kept my promise to care for our boys. Now it's time to take care of myself." Taking my hand, she led me upstairs. The moment was nervous for both of us. Katie hadn't been with anyone in almost 2 decades, and I didn't want to ruin a friendship that had lasted most of our lives. But like riding a bike, we found our rhythm. Later, as we lay in bed, Katie turned to me. "Mark, you're moving in with me." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a declaration. "Wait," I said, sitting up slightly. "Isn't that a little bold? What if this doesn't work out?" She propped herself up on one arm, giving me a playful but serious look. "Mark, we've been friends for decades. We're too old for games. You need a place to live, and I have the room. I care about you, and you care about me. It's practical. Save your rent money for your future mortgage. Besides, you know this house better than anyone." I hesitated. What about Amanda? It might get awkward. I gestured toward my old house across the street. Katie shrugged. "That's her problem, not ours. What matters is what we want, and I want you here." And so I moved in. At first, it was strange. Amanda remained bitter, unwilling to move forward. One day, while I was patching a crack in her driveway, she crossed her arms and glared at me. "Mark, when are you going to come back home? This is ridiculous. You belong here with me." I peeled off the cover of the sealant and replied evenly. "Amanda, I know you regret what happened, but it's over. You need to move on." "With who?" she snapped. "My clients are ex-wives, and I work with gay hairdressers. I never thought I'd become one of those lonely women." I didn't respond, gathering my tools instead. "Mark," she said softly, her tone pleading now, "just give me another chance. For the boys. For the holidays." I sighed. "Amanda, I forgave you a long time ago. But trust. That's another story. The boys will be home soon, and we can alternate dinners between your house and Katie's. But that's it." Amanda folded her arms, her expression defiant. "I will never step foot in her house." "Then we'll miss you," I said simply. Surprisingly, the boys adapted to our new dynamic without issue. By Christmas, they had pressured Amanda into joining us at Katie's for a brief visit. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Over time, Amanda and Katie grew polite, if not friendly. Katie encouraged me to continue helping Amanda with small repairs and spending time with the boys at her house. After a year of living with Katie, I was happier than I'd been in years. Our love wasn't the fiery kind of our youth, but something deeper, steadier. One day, I brought up the idea of making things official. Katie cupped my face in her hands and smiled. "Mark, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, but I promised myself I'd only marry once. I hope you can understand." I didn't entirely understand, but I remembered my father's advice. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Life has a strange way of balancing the chaos. In the years that followed, I found my rhythm, not in grand gestures or fiery passion, but in the quiet certainty of a life rebuilt with care. Katie and I settled into something steady and unshakable, rooted in years of friendship and the trust we'd earned through shared hardships. It wasn't the kind of love that sets the world on fire. It was better. It was a love that lasts. Amanda, for her part, found her footing too. Over time, she let go of the past, focusing on her independence and her relationship with the boys. The bitterness faded, replaced by a polite distance that occasionally gave way to warmth during shared moments with our kids. The boys thrived, and watching them grow into the men they're becoming fills me with pride. Holidays became a delicate dance, sometimes at Katie's, sometimes at Amanda's, but they were filled with laughter and respect. Even if the past still lingered at the edges, my father's words often come back to me. A man's strength lies in letting go of what he cannot change and holding firm to what truly matters. Sitting on the porch with Katie, watching the sunset streak the sky with hues of orange and gold, I realized I had finally found my peace. It wasn't in what I had lost or what could have been. It was in the life I chose to build, one deliberate step at a time. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.